For the first time in history, Taiwan is charging a Chinese ship captain with deliberately cutting one of the country's undersea cables. Prosecutors in southern Taiwan say the man was the captain of the Hongtai 58, a ship registered in Togo. The vessel was seen loitering near the undersea cable just days before it was cut. Despite multiple attempts, Taiwanese authorities couldn't establish contact with the vessel. The Coast Guard later boarded the ship and detained the crew for investigation. The 7 crew members have not been charged due to a lack of evidence, and they're now being sent back to China. This is one of at least 2 cable-cutting incidents this year involving China-linked ships. We'll keep you updated as this story develops. There's been more volatility in global markets as investors weigh the impact of Donald Trump's tariff policies. Wall Street dropped again after the White House imposed even higher duties for Chinese imports. Rosie Greninger reports.
American toy shop owner Joe Novak is bracing for an uncertain future, as the Trump administration clarified that tariffs against Chinese goods are higher than initially understood. Beijing will pay a 125% tariff, on top of the 20% imposed last year, subjecting imports to the US to a total levy of 145%. And American consumers are ultimately expected to pay the price.
So as you can tell by tariffs affecting China predominantly right now, as well as some Southeast Asia, a tariff of 20, 40, 50, they keep going up, 80, 100%, is going to definitely affect the cost of the toys.
Thanks,
After announcing sweeping global tariffs last week, US President Donald Trump has paused the policy for 90 days for all countries except China. That's after China retaliated, applying levies of 84% to goods imported from the US. But President Trump says he still wants to make a deal with Beijing.
I have great respect for President Xi. He's been, in a true sense, he's been a friend of mine for a long period of time. And I think that we'll end up working out something that's very good for both countries. I look forward to it.
China claims they are open to dialogue, but only if it's based on mutual respect. As the trade war between the world's 2 biggest economies continues to escalate, the impacts are being felt on the stock market. After rallying in their previous session, much of Wall Street's gains were wiped out overnight. The exchanges in Asia and Australia have also plunged. Financial experts say if the tariff policy remains, so will the uncertainty.
There is one bit of signal this market is sending to the president, and really to one man, the president himself. We do not like this tariff strategy. Every bit of news can be linked back to a tweet or a direct policy item that came out which was tariff related.
Trump has conceded there will be initial difficulties, but remains adamant Americans must stay focused on his end goal: boosting manufacturing in the US and in turn creating more jobs. The US president claims more than 70 countries are looking to negotiate a deal, now including the European Union, which has halted planned retaliatory measures.
We want to negotiate. We want to talk. We appreciate that you have brought this pause on so-called reciprocal tariffs, and we in turn are now pausing our proposed countermeasures.
Trump's aides say negotiations are going well, with over a dozen deals already being offered to the United States Trade Representative.
USTR has informed us that there are maybe 15 countries now that have made explicit offers that we're studying and considering and, deciding whether they're good enough to present to the president.
Despite being one of the US's main trading partners, China is not among the countries lining up to negotiate, saying they refuse to bow to pressure, blackmail and threats, leaving the trade war between these 2 economic powers escalating and likely to impact global growth. Dolphine Chen and Rosie Greninger for TaiwanPlus.
Local government leaders in Taiwan are calling for a unified response to increased US tariffs.
这些也需要中央的挹注，希望能够把我们4个县市的产业在这个硬体基础面，还有这种技术内涵面，都能够趁这个挑战的时候，能够把它拉上来。
Leaders from Taiwan's regional tech hubs were meeting with local industry leaders. They said that new US tariffs could reduce export revenues and called for investments to upgrade production and build more resilient supply chains. While Trump has delayed tariffs of 32% on Taiwan, the country is still subject to rates of up to 25% on many goods. Asian stock markets wavered on Friday despite a Thursday rebound following a pause on US President Donald Trump's tariffs for all countries except China. Taiwan's TAIEX closed up on Friday, but other Asian stock indexes were mixed over fears of a US-China trade war. Japan's Nikkei and South Korea's Kospi are both down, while the Shanghai and Hong Kong indexes are up slightly. The White House says US tariffs on China stand at 145%, but China has not backed down from issuing its own reciprocal tariffs of 84%. After a week of market fluctuations, let's get more on how global trade will now be affected. Our reporter Alec MacDonald spoke to Jia-Ian Chong from the National University of Singapore.
With the U.S. opening a trade war that has been underpinned by uncertain policy, how have geopolitical partnerships shifted in Asia?
What's actually really interesting is with the tariffs, the alliance and formally the alliances and the other kinds of relationships have not changed. They've not technically changed. There's been no abrogation of treaties. There's been no amendment of treaties. But what has happened is that there's a lot more apprehension about U.S. commitment. There's a lot less clarity over the direction in which the U.S. is heading, especially in terms of cooperation. People might bring up the issue of Ukraine, but Ukraine is not a U.S. treaty ally.
In this instance, then what case can Taipei benefit from this new trade environment?
So what's interesting is because Taiwan had actually benefited from the last sort of shock to trade during the first Trump administration, where economic ties with the PRC, between the US and the PRC, were tightened. So there was this acceleration of a China plus one strategy. Many Taiwanese firms relocated back to Taiwan, or Taiwanese firms moved from the PRC elsewhere. And because Taiwan was seen as part of that safer supply chain, it gained. I guess that is something that Taiwan can still bank on, although the certainty of that approach certainly is called into question by the Trump administration's more perhaps cavalier attitude towards longstanding relationships. That having been said, Taiwan is a major producer of semiconductors. It is important for U.S. security interests. U.S. have not stepped away from them. In fact, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, during his visit, has said that the U.S. continues to be interested in deterrence in East Asia. So those are things that Taiwan can work on. Taiwan has shown itself to be a good partner in the past. It can potentially do that, continue to do that.
Next week, Xi Jinping will visit Malaysia, Cambodia, and Vietnam, three nations which had very high U.S. tariffs applied on them before the pause. So what implications could this visit bring about?
I think these states were beneficiaries of the China plus one strategies, and hence their high surplus, and probably with the United States, hence the tariffs. At the same time, these three Southeast Asian states are ones that have been trying to cultivate closer relations with the PRC at any rate. So I suppose looking at the trade war with the United States, General Secretary Xi Jinping probably thinks that he can perhaps find inroads for cooperation with these two states. Now, things are also complicated, and probably Xi will have to work through them. One, because these three states, the way that their economies work is that they will sometimes produce components that get shipped to China for final assembly, or vice versa. But one of the major final markets is the United States. If the U.S. is closed off to the PRC, we could see a diversion of trade through these countries toward the U.S., and the question will be whether Washington wants to then shut off those channels as well. At the same time, these three countries, they being in close economic having close economic ties with the PRC means to say that they also take quite a lot of PRC exports, and there have been concerns about overcapacity in the past. This pressure is likely to increase as the U.S. market is essentially shut off to PRC goods, and that the diversion of trade to these countries from the PRC could put a lot of pressure on these economies, especially small and medium-sized enterprises.
That was Jia-Ian Chong from the National University of Singapore. As we just heard, Chinese President Xi Jinping is expected to visit Cambodia, Vietnam, and Malaysia next week. It comes as Cambodia faces the harshest US tariffs outside of China. The levy's been delayed for now, but as Chris Gorin reports, the fear is very real for factory workers.
In Phnom Penh's busy streets, Nam Lung grabs sweet potatoes on her way to work at a factory for American clothing brand Levi's. It's one of 2 jobs she works to support herself and her sister, jobs she fears could vanish under new U.S. tariffs.
If there's no negotiations to remove these tariffs, it will be hard for investors to keep their factories here. If they shut it down, we'll lose our jobs, which will be a big problem for me.
Among Donald Trump's tariffs announced last week, Cambodia received the most punishing of all, a 49% tax on goods it exports to the U.S. The U.S. is Cambodia's largest export destination, accounting for 40% of its total exports. The tariff has been postponed for 90 days, but that's little comfort to workers like Nam Lung.
My sister here is sick. She can't work, so she lives with me. If I have no work, no income, then I die, and she dies too.
At the factory, she makes about $300 US a month, but she says it's not enough to support herself and her family. At night, she works a second job at a beauty salon. And as U.S. tariffs shake Southeast Asia, Chinese President Xi Jinping is stepping in, announcing today that he will make state visits to Cambodia, Vietnam, and Malaysia. Beijing's attention may seem like a lifeline to workers like Nam Lung, who just want to work.
I strongly appeal to our government to negotiate with rich countries like the US on ending the tariffs so that investors will stay in Cambodia, which will save our jobs.
For now, Nam Lung continues working, day and night, hoping that someone is listening. Alex Chun, Izzy Wells, and Chris Gorin for TaiwanPlus.
A former county councillor from China who was retroactively removed from office is taking legal action against the Taiwanese government.
我想只有进入正式的司法程序，我也希望司法可以秉持着一个法理跟一个程序的正义，来还给我们陆配一个参与公职选举的一个合法性、正当性。
The Interior Ministry revoked Shi Shuiyan's office after she couldn't prove she had given up her Chinese citizenship. Taiwan requires public officials to renounce foreign citizenship before being sworn in. But Shi's lawyer argues that under Taiwan's constitution, Chinese citizens are not considered foreigners and that they fall under a separate law. The Mainland Affairs Council says Chinese citizens are not recognized as Taiwanese nationals.
那什么样的人有中华民国国籍呢？ 那根据入出国移民法，中华民国国民是具有中华民国国籍之居住台湾地区，你设有户籍，或是你在台湾地区没有户籍的国民，这个就是中华民国国民。所以大陆地区人民，他并不属于中华民国国民。
If the Interior Ministry's decision stands, Shi will have to pay back any salary and benefits that she received during her term. The Global Taiwan Institute says Taiwan should increase its defense budget and buy more weapons in response to threats from China. The Washington-based think tank made the recommendation in a report co-written by Brent Christensen, a former director of the US's de facto embassy in Taiwan. The report says Taiwan must show its international partners that it's committed to defending itself. It says that any increase in weapon purchases from the United States would be seen as a positive in Washington. The report also calls on the US to speed up arms shipments to Taiwan. Thank you for watching What's Up Taiwan. You can visit the TaiwanPlus website or follow our social media for more stories from Taiwan and around the world. Finally, check out this puppet show in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, highlighting the impact of climate change. I'm Laurel Stewart. Take care and see you next time.